Our delegation started in the beginning of the year when Bethany and I had a personal delegation to Sheila Malcolmson, MLA in Victoria. And she recommended that we could actually do a thing called a delegation. And Stephanie Higginson, my MLA in the Nanaimo area, backed that up. And so we put in the application, and 6 months later, it came through that we had the opportunity for the delegation. And so I will just basically take it from the top. I will kick this off and then pass it over to Tracey and then to Bethany and then back to myself. So this is basically, let me take this from the top, play from the start. Our delegation was on LNG, the climate, health, and the economics. This is what it looked like in the room in the legislature, with Bethany coming in on the screen because she was in Ontario at the time, right? This was group one. We had Paul Choi from the left to the right. So we got myself down there with my hand on Dana Lajeunesse shoulder, Tracey behind me and Bethany on the screen. And the MLAs, we got Paul Choi, Deborah Toporowski, Jennifer Blatherwick, Dana Lajeunesse, and Susie Chant. The person to the right of Tracey is Eric Minty, who's from Weekend, who came in just to help us make a note of what the MLAs were thinking and seeing and the stuff like that. Group two, we had Janet Routledge, Tamara Davidson, Minister of Environment, Darlene Rochford, and Sunita Dia. In group three, we had Jennifer Whiteside, Brittany Anderson, and Rohini Arora. And in group four, we had George Anderson, Lisa Bear, Amna Shah, Stephanie Higginson, Bowen Ma, and Terry Young. So I kick things off by saying that basically our key message, I can't read my own script at the top there. Our key message to you today is that BC's health, climate, and economy, it's about that. It's not a benefit. It's not in the public interest. Our goal is to provide you with the evidence that will enable you to make the decisions that will protect British Columbians' health, environment, and fiscal stability. By the way, we didn't use slides, so we're just putting the slides in because it's better on Zoom. While LNG may not be in your portfolio, many of you are making policy decisions in Canada or Caucus to approve pipelines and LNG projects or to support LNG by providing tax breaks or subsidies or building new transmission lines. This is an all-of-government issue that connects to affordability, emergency preparedness, public health, and community safety. LNG is a cost, not a revenue generator. We had 4 minutes each, so we're taking 10 minutes each today so as not to rush it. We believe that expanding LNG will undermine your ability to deliver the core priorities that were identified in the government's mandate letters. LNG will not grow the economy. It will not create good jobs. It will increase costs for families. It harms people's health and worsens access to healthcare. It makes our neighborhoods and communities unsafe. It undermines climate action, and it will undermine UNDRIP. So next up, I get stop sharing and hand over to Tracey, who did the next part of things. All yours, Tracey.
Hi, everybody.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Guy. As Guy said, LNG is a risk to BC's health, its climate and economy. I'm going to focus today on how LNG is a risk to BC's climate, although all of these things are interconnected.
And Tracey, can you introduce yourself first? Because I forgot to do that.
Yes, I'm just about to do that.
Oh, you go.
So my name is Tracey Saxby. My name is Tracey Saxby. I am a marine scientist. I am the executive director of My Sea to Sky, which is a people-powered organization that has been fighting to stop wood fiber LNG for 11 years now, since 2014. We're also fighting to stop Fortescue's pipeline, which is connecting to wood fiber LNG. And I'm also the lead author of the BC Climate Emergency Campaign's annual progress reports. This is a really exciting initiative that more than 600 organizations across BC have signed on to call on the BC government to confront the climate emergency. So as you all know, climate change is an existential threat, and it is placing immense financial and social burdens on British Columbians. Tens of thousands of people across the province are already experiencing displacement, loss of livelihood, dangerous working conditions, and health impacts. People are dying. Smoke from Canada's 2023 wildfires contributed to an estimated 70,000 premature deaths in North America and Europe, and 85,000 deaths worldwide. Climate change is also harming our economy. It's driving up food prices, home insurance, energy costs, and healthcare costs. And to give you a personal example, this is a photo of my basement where I live in Squamish. My partner and I bought this house in 2006, and we spent a lot of time renovating this basement. This is my basement now after it flooded in 2020, thanks to climate change. It's been completely gutted. We now have to fight for insurance every year, and we've been quoted $500,000 to rebuild. So climate change is expensive, and this is an example of how climate change is impacting me and my family, but I know that climate change is impacting everybody, whether it's from wildfire smoke, just wildfires, displacement, like that. There's so many people that are already struggling to make ends meet because of climate change. And all of the kitchen table issues that are a big focus of this government's mandate to make life more affordable are affected by climate change. The good news is that we know what we need to do. We need to rapidly phase out fossil fuels as a top priority, and we need to reduce our emissions. We know that every ton of greenhouse gas pollution matters. The problem is that BC is not on track to meet its climate targets. And I'm going to talk you through this chart here. So if you look at this red line that shows BC's emissions over time from 1990 through to 2023, the blue line that goes down from 2023 is where we need to meet our climate targets. So we're meant to reduce emissions right now, according to BC's legislation, by 16% by 2025, 40% by 2030, and 60% by 2040, and then onwards. BC has never met one of its climate targets. It has missed every single target to date. And you can see that emissions really have not gone down. And right now, because BC is doubling down on LNG exports, and LNG Canada Phase 1 has started operations this year, you can see that things are going in the wrong direction. And these emissions on this other line that are going up are the emissions in BC from these LNG export facilities. So very clearly, we are moving in the wrong direction here. So Canada is the fourth largest oil producer and the fifth largest gas producer in the world. And BC's emissions are only going to increase as we invest in LNG exports. And unfortunately, this is what we're doing. We are doubling down on LNG right now. Yesterday, BC's industrial strategy was just released, and BC is now planning to have 3 new LNG export facilities up and running by 2032. So this is a photo of Premier David Eby and Minister Adrian Dix at the launch of LNG Canada, which began operations in Kitimat this year. So I want to debunk a few of the myths around LNG that you might have heard. So LNG is not clean, and it is not low emission. This photo here is a photograph of the flare stack in Kitimat. So during startup operations, the flare has reached heights up to 90 meters high. And this is causing huge health impacts for local residents, which Bethany is going to talk about a little bit later, but it's also increasing emissions a lot. And these emissions have not been assessed in the environmental assessments for human health or for climate impacts. This is some more photographs of the flare stack in Kitimat, and you can see how polluting this flare is. This flare actually on this day, this is about 60 meters high, but it's all of this toxic pollution that is causing human health impacts to Kitimat residents that Bethany will talk about a little bit more. So another myth that I'd like to debunk is LNG is a fossil fuel. It is liquefied natural gas or methane. It is 86 times more harmful to the climate than carbon dioxide. And to liquefy and then ship the gas requires enormous amounts of energy. So when you factor in the emissions from fracking, processing, and transporting the gas, the energy you need to liquefy it, then the emissions from shipping and turning it back into gas before it is finally burned by the end consumer, LNG is one of the most polluting fossil fuels. It is as bad or worse than coal. So it is not a climate solution. It is not clean. It is not low emission. And to put this into context, if all of the LNG export projects that are proposed go ahead, And the provincial and federal governments have just approved more fossil fuel infrastructure to support LNG and for LNG exports. So the emissions in BC alone is 30 megatons a year. So if you look again at this chart shows all of the emissions for all of BC. So in 2023, we're sitting around 60 megatons. If all these projects go ahead, we are adding an additional 30 megatons to BC's emissions every year. That's half the emissions of the entire province of BC. And if we add in the total emissions when the gas is burned in other countries where it's exported to, we are adding the equivalent of greenhouse gas emissions of 55 other countries. So all of the LNG that is being produced in BC, all of the emissions, like from when there is fracked to when it is burned at the burner tip, it's equivalent to the emissions of 55 other countries. Another myth I'd like to debunk is that BC's LNG will reduce emissions in China. There are several studies that show that LNG displaces renewables, not coal, and it delays the clean energy transition abroad. Ultimately, we cannot reduce greenhouse gas emissions by burning more fossil fuels. But what BC is doing is they are proposing to electrify LNG exports to try to reduce emissions here. And they are planning to build a new transmission line at massive public cost. You might have seen the announcements recently with Carney and the fast tracking that is happening. It is like the North Coast transmission line is now a priority project. It is going to get funded by the federal government and the province. So this is new energy infrastructure that is being built to greenwash LNG, and the public is paying for it. But if we want to electrify all of the approved LNG projects, we will need the equivalent of 8 Site C dams. This photo here is a photo of Woodfibre LNG, which is under construction in Squamish. This is the LNG train that is being built here, and all of the other on-site infrastructure. Woodfibre LNG alone, which is one of the smaller projects, needs 40% of the energy from Site C Dam. So if you think about the cost of that, the public cost to build Site C Dam, it's $16 billion. This is another massive public subsidy to greenwash LNG projects.
Tracey, your 10-minute runs out in 2 minutes. So, yeah.
Thank you. I'm nearly done. So BC is falling behind. We're using our investments in renewable energy to power LNG exports instead of using them to reduce emissions from buildings or transportation. Instead of investing in healthy and resilient communities, we are using our limited tax dollars to prop up foreign-owned LNG exports, many of which are owned by US billionaires that are directly linked to Trump. So this doesn't seem like an elbows-up response to me. We understand that in the current context of Trump's tariffs, that this government is looking for revenue. But to put that in context, the projected revenue from LNG Canada Phase 1 is $1 billion a year. But that's what BC spent fighting wildfires in 2023. This revenue from LNG is not going to pay for schools. It's not going to pay for hospitals. It's paying for climate disasters. And LNG is adding more fuel to the fire. Investing in LNG also puts British Columbia at risk of liability for climate harms. Earlier this year, in July, the International Court of Justice ruled that countries are not only responsible for their emissions, but also for the oil and gas they produce, export, and subsidize. So what we asked our decision makers to do was for them to understand that every time that they approve a pipeline or an LNG export facility or subsidies for LNG, they are now putting British Columbians at risk of lawsuits. So what we are calling on them to do is climate action now, because that is a much, much better investment in our future. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to Dr. Bethany Ricker from CAPE.
Okay, great. I see there's quite a few questions in the chat for Tracey. Are we saving the questions for the end, Guy? Is that the plan?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. I will go ahead and share my screen then here. Okay, my name's Dr. Bethany Ricker. I'm a family doctor reaching you today from the lands of the Snuneymuxw people, otherwise known as Nanaimo, which is where I live and practice. And I'm one of the co-chairs of the British Columbia Regional Committee of CAPE, the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment. So this past September, CAPE launched our annual campaign to urge our politicians to investigate the health harms of LNG prior to moving ahead and approving new projects. We gathered a delegation of CAPE physicians and nursing colleagues from their organization, CANE, as well as healthcare professionals from northern BC, which is the heart of the sacrifice zone where fracking and pipeline development is primarily happening. And as well, we gathered Indigenous leaders from the Gitignan, Gitxsan, and Wet'suwet'en territories. And all of the stories that were shared were quite shocking. And I'll go through some of those stories with you. LNG causes health harms at every step in the process, from extraction to transportation, liquefaction, shipping, and even to using gas in our own homes and in our daily lives. So we'll review what some of these health harms are. There are two primary mechanisms. Oh, sorry, I'm not advancing my slides here. Sorry. There are two primary mechanisms of pollution, of direct local pollution from the LNG industry. One is contamination of ground and of the ground, the soil, and the water. To frack LNG, the process of fracking involves drilling deep wells combined with horizontal drilling. Then there is sand, water, and toxic chemicals that are injected into these deep wells under high pressure to shatter the rock and release gas. Then this frac fluid returns to the surface, containing both the injected chemicals plus naturally occurring toxic materials. There are over 1,000 chemicals used in the process, and some of them are known or suspected to cause cancer, negatively affect reproductive or child development, or disrupt hormones. There are well-documented cases of contamination of local surface and groundwater, which contaminates drinking water. And exposure to contaminated drinking water is linked to gastrointestinal problems, hormone disruption, and reproductive disorders. In Dawson Creek in northeastern BC, physicians were seeing such frequent health conditions they suspected were linked to contaminated water that they started installing reverse osmosis water filters in their own homes, while other community members may not have been aware or had the financial capacity to do so. And then there's the air pollution side of things. There are several sources of air pollution between fracking well sites and along the path of LNG production, shipping, and use. That includes evaporation from open frac fluid ponds, diesel equipment used at fracking sites, methane gas leaks at any point in LNG production, and flaring, which is the controlled burning of natural gas that Tracey brought up. And even using natural gas in our homes and communities produces air pollutants. These pollutants include volatile organic compounds such as benzene and formaldehyde, nitrous oxides, sulfur dioxides, particulate matter, and methane, all of which have known adverse human health effects. When we met at our delegation in September, one of the Chief Namoks, who is present at the delegation, talked about communities where children are prophylactically prescribed inhalers because there's such a high chance that they're going to require them anyways at some point in their life. So clear evidence of air pollution risks to health. So I'll get into some of the specifics of types of health harms. The type of health impact most studied to date is the effects on pregnant patients and infants. Living near a fracking site increases the risks of complications of pregnancy, such as high blood pressure and eclampsia. It increases risks of adverse pregnancy outcomes, such as miscarriages, preterm birth, birth defects like congenital heart defects, neural tube defects, and more, and low birth weight. And all of these conditions can cause complications throughout life, such as adverse cardiovascular, neurodevelopmental, and respiratory conditions. There's also an overall higher risk of fetal and infant death near fracking sites. We have had biomonitoring studies here in British Columbia and northeastern BC, which have reported higher levels of benzene, which is a known carcinogen, as well as multiple other trace toxicants in the air and the tap water of pregnant Indigenous patients living near fracking sites. There is an increased incidence of asthma and respiratory illness. Living near fracking sites is associated with higher rates of asthma diagnoses, inhaler prescriptions, asthma-related emergency department visits, and asthma-related hospitalizations. There's also increased rates of pneumonia hospitalizations among seniors and overall more respiratory symptoms amongst populations living near fracking sites. One story shared by Dr. Meyer, who's a family doctor who's been working in Dawson Creek for decades, was that there was an internist living in their community who diagnosed 10 cases of a normally rare disease, interstitial lung disease. And that's 10 cases in their small community, and that was over 2 years, when normally the incidence is 5 per 100,000 per year. And he couldn't find the cause, and that was greatly alarming to this doctor moving to their community. I'll also mention that at the end use of gas, it is harmful to our respiratory system. Using gas for heating and cooking in our homes is associated with a 40% higher risk of childhood asthma compared to children living in homes without gas use for heating and cooking, which is similar to the risk of living with a smoker. There are higher rates of cancers living near fracking sites. 50 or more carcinogens are released into the air and water by fracking activities. In particular, there's a 2 to 3 times higher risk of ALL, a type of childhood blood cancer. And there are possible associations with prostate cancer, bladder cancer, childhood brain cancers, and lung cancers. And I'll again just share a story from Dr. Meyer in Dawson Creek about how she had a patient who was 8 years old. And in that patient's grade 2 class, there were a total of 3 children with cancers, which again, completely abnormal numbers of cancer diagnoses. She also shared that the radiologist in their community diagnosed his 10th case of glioblastoma, which is a highly aggressive fatal brain cancer. And that radiologist had previously worked in Cape Town for 30 years, and he hadn't even diagnosed that many glioblastomas. These were also amongst younger patients, unfortunately and sadly, than typical in patients in their 20s and 30s. There are worsened cardiovascular outcomes from living near fracking sites, including increased heart failure hospital admissions, increased heart attacks and strokes, and higher rates of deaths from strokes. Studies have also reported increases in other self-reported symptoms such as migraines, sinusitis, and skin conditions when living near fracking sites. And overall, people living near fracking sites die sooner. They have higher rates of premature deaths and higher rates of hospitalizations for multiple reasons: respiratory, cancer-related, neurological, autoimmune. One of the scary things is that there is a lot we don't know. We have relatively few Canadian health studies despite our 20-year history of fracking. In a review in March 2024, with the specific goal of focusing on Canadian data, only 2 out of the 52 studies that met inclusion criteria were Canadian. So this is an evidence of absence that's concerning, given the continued expansion, continuing to approve these projects without adequate health information. And there's also not adequate information about the disproportionate effects on Indigenous people who are largely populating these areas that are being built up with LNG infrastructure. We also need more time and more information to understand the cumulative health effects, so the effects of living near multiple fracking sites all surrounding each other, or the combined risks of other local exposures from other industries, as well as further information on the health risks of abandoned frack sites. How much more time do I have here, Guy?
You've got 1 minute.
Okay, yeah. So we don't have time to really go any further today, but I will just say all I've really been able to review right now is those direct, immediate health impacts of living, primarily focusing on fracking. I will also, of course, mention that, as Tracey brought up about the flaring and the flare stack, since Kitimat started exporting in June from their facility, there have been increased reports of nosebleeds, of asthma flares, increased puffer prescription for people with asthma. So there are certainly effects there that we're not yet seeing. And there was a review recently, a study recently published in September showing that from satellite data, about 3 times more flaring happens in the first year of startup operations from an export facility compared to at normal operations. And that startup period can last up to 2 years. It's not just a day or two. And those emissions are not being tracked. They are not being monitored. They're not part of the environmental assessment at all. So even if current levels of these air pollutant toxins are reported to be in a safe range, we're actually not capturing a lot of the emissions and a lot of the toxic pollutants that are being spewed into the air. Beyond this, I won't have time to address this today, but there are a lot of community level effects that are associated with a boom and bust economy, and Guy will get into some of the economic factors, as well as healthcare system effects. Like in Dawson Creek, where Dr. Meyer, who I mentioned, works, about half of the local doctors have left Dawson Creek in recent years because they were so alarmed by the health effects of their patients and the risks to their own families. So just keep in mind that there are a lot of less direct health and social implications of the LNG industry that we don't have time to review today.
Thanks, Bethany. So I will wrap things up. I'll wait till you stop sharing with me. I will wrap things up by looking at the economics, starting with the climate crisis, since this is the thing that's had me so alarmed for the last 25 years, concerned that people are not understanding the extent of the danger it poses. A recent study by the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research in Germany found that within 25 years, the global cost of climate disasters could reach 32 trillion a year. This would reduce global GDP by 17%, making its economic impact worse than the Great Depression, but with no end in sight. The cost of climate-caused wildfires and storms in America in the first 6 months of 2025 was the highest ever, over 100 billion. The Los Angeles wildfire alone destroyed 16,000 buildings. The hurt and distress is especially hard for people who struggle to get by on a low income, who have health challenges or disabilities, whose landlords have not installed heat pumps, or who work outdoors in the heat on a farm or a construction project. The Internal Displacement Monitoring Center has estimated also that by 2050 there could be 1.2 billion climate refugees desperate to find a safe place to live. So I want to talk you through the shell game, climate pollution, electricity, subsidies, the glut, opportunity cost, and a better way forward, all in a very short period of time. The argument that LNG is clean is that electrifying the liquefaction process will reduce its emissions. An LNG company normally uses 10% of its gas to liquefy the gas and run its processes. By using electricity, that 10% becomes available for export, so electrification will have zero impact on LNG's global emissions. It's a shell game designed to put the emissions on someone else's books. And David Eby last year, in an interview with Bloomberg, said, we've made some pretty clear commitments around driving down emissions in the province, and we're looking at a table with them, that's the producers, around how we can try to achieve both of our goals, Eby said, about the investors behind LNG Canada. From their perspective, ensuring that reliable, low-carbon energy. And from our perspective, all the emissions not showing up on BC's books as the main producer. So reality is that LNG produces more climate pollution than coal. This is from Rob Howarth, the American expert on this stuff. It is dirtier than coal. And the claim is that electrifying will reduce BC's LNG emissions by 45 to 50%, making it among the cleanest and greenest in the world. In fact, someone, an interviewee on The Current just 3 days ago said it'll make 50% cleaner. The reality is that electrifying will reduce BC's LNG emissions by only 7%, because 93% of the climate pollution comes from LNG's fugitive methane and final combustion. It would increase global emissions, adding yet more fuel to the climate fire. And it'll only achieve that 7% if every plant is electrified, which is impossible, as we'll come to. When you compare with coal, when climate scientists measure the climate impact of coal, they start with the emissions when it's burnt, and then add the small amount of emissions from mining, transportation. But when the LNG industry and the government talk about LNG, they count only the emissions from liquefaction, ignoring entirely the emissions when it's burnt. This is greenwashing, deception. So this is some numbers I wasn't able to share with delegates, but important to share with you. So there are 5 sources of LNG greenhouse gases. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is the CO2 equivalent per megajoule of LNG. For those 5 things. This is the percentage of emissions that amounts to. So combustion is 40%, upstream and midstream is 43%, liquefaction is 5%. This is the percentage of methane that is part of those emissions. This is the result after electrification, and this is the final reduction. So there's a 38% reduction in liquefaction emissions if everything is electrified, but only a 67% reduction in everything. And this is after adjusting Howard's figures for the Canadian context. So if you take LNG shipped by tanker, there are 7.5 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent for each ton of LNG. BC's 8 proposed project, 50 megatons a year. That's 375 megatons a year, 6 times more than BC's entire annual climate pollution every year. Just 2 of BC's main LNG projects will cause as much climate pollution as all of BC's annual climate pollution. Where will the electricity come from? BC Hydro will get 17 terawatt hours from Site C and the recent calls for power. Full electrification will need 43 terawatt hours, the equivalent of 8 new Site C dams. And there's subsidies. To help BC's LNG industry become competitive, the federal and BC governments are promised $4 billion already in subsidies and supports. And by 2031, LNG Canada will have received $1.36 billion. And then we look at the global market and the looming glut. LNG is very price volatile. When the price skyrocketed following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, it triggered new LNG projects. By 2026, there'll be a glut on the market, causing prices to fall. At the same time, the Asian market is drying up because China is importing gas from Russia and because wind and solar are cheaper than gas for generating electricity. So globally in 2024, renewable energy produced 92.5% of all new power globally. So the top graph shows the sudden spike in price when Russia invaded Ukraine. And the bottom graph shows the cumulative supply and increase of LNG that's going to be happening over the next 5 years, putting the glut in the market, reducing the price, making hopefully all of these projects financially non-viable, but risking stranded finance and wasted BC subsidies, taxpayers' money. This shows the falling price. The green line is the profit margin, falling profit margins on the US to Europe run. The red line is the falling profit margins on the US to Asia run, which is similar to ourselves. So this is not looking good. If you ship a ton of LNG, it can generate 7 megawatt hours of electricity. If you ship a ton of solar panels, over 25 years, they'll generate 1,000 megawatt hours, 143 times more. This is data extracted from Bill McKibben's new book, Here Comes the Sun, and converted from coal to LNG. So the International Energy Agency has mapped out a scenario for net zero by 2050, in which it finds that there is no need for investment in new coal, oil, or natural gas. And the British climate economist Nicholas Stern said in October 2025 that growth fueled by fossil fuels is futile because the damage it causes ends in self-destruction. Investment in climate solutions is the economic growth story of the 21st century. So the Pembina Institute is developing scenarios for a paper they're going to publish in December about the use of the electricity, and I got a sneak preview. If all the new electricity goes to LNG, there'll still be only enough to meet half its needs and none for anything else. A better approach would be to use most of the new power for critical mining and minerals, battery factories and data centers in the Northwest. This would produce 2.5 times more added GDP, create 8,000 permanent jobs, and generate just as much revenue for the government in the form of taxation. So these are their scenarios. On the left, you've got the new electricity, the 17,000 gigawatt hours. On the big tall blue thing is if it all went to LNG, it can't. There's not enough. So if it was the other three scenarios, it can be shared and spread around. And looking at those other scenarios, we have on the left the increase to GDP, right? 4.3 billion addition for LNG and 10.8 billion for a diversified portfolio, and the increase to jobs is 3,000 full-time max for LNG, 11,000 for the diversified portfolio. So, do we want an LNG or a strong green economy? This is the choice the government needs to make. Why would we use our hard-earned taxpayers' dollars to prop up American other foreign-owned businesses? LNG is a sunset industry. Even after the subsidies, some projects may not go ahead. Others may end up as scrap, rusting on the northwest coast. We believe LNG is a risk to BC's health, climate, and economy, not a benefit. A 2025 Abacus poll found that 83% of Canadians believe climate change is happening and want governments to address it. Only 17% think they shouldn't. Another poll this year found that 56% of British Columbians do not support fossil fuel subsidies. Only 22% think we should subsidize it. And a poll last year found that 69% of British Columbians want to develop renewable energy and only 15% want to develop LNG. So going forward, this is the graph for the last poll, the StratCom one, showing that people wanting renewables and not wanting LNG. So our MLAs, you have a choice. To double down on a volatile industry that harms British Columbians or to invest in a sustainable, healthy, resilient future. We believe that our government should freeze all new LNG approvals and cancel the permits for projects not yet built, phase out the subsidies, conduct a cumulative health impact assessment of the health impacts of fracking and LNG flaring, and invest instead in renewable energy, affordable housing retrofits, and other climate solutions, generating thousands of jobs and a flourishing green economy for British Columbia. Thank you. So that's where we stopped the presentation. And we have 20 minutes for opening it up for questions. So please raise your yellow hand so we can see who wants to go first. But I will say before we get into that, someone asked about the response from the MLAs. None of them came out and said, well, we're opposed to LNG because they're all bound to loyalty, caucus to the loyalty and stuff, loyalty to the caucus. But the number of people who said, we really thank you for this. We're so grateful. You're putting in this work. This is so important. Thank you so much. I read that as code for the fact that they really would like to be doing this stuff, but they haven't found the wherewithal to organize as an alternative to David Eby, who was just reapproved for leadership by 80% 2 days ago, and do a formal challenge in caucus, knowing they could lose their jobs at whatever they've got for. So they're in a dilemma. What they wanted from us was talking points about the health impacts, talking points about the mathematics, the finances, and specifically talking points about alternatives, especially for rural areas. What is the plan B? What do they say to people who, say, well, we need the jobs and it's all about affordability. It's not about this. So we're working on that. I'm hoping our ideal is to produce a monthly briefing paper for the MLAs on talking points. They'd be Conservative and Green and New Democrats. We're sort of probably maybe starting in January, but that's where we're at this. And I'm personally developing a contrast between plan A for danger and plan B for better future to lay out what that other plan could be that addresses both climate and affordability. So open it up. I haven't had a chance to go through all the questions in the chat, so just jump in. Tracey, you share some insights first.
Yeah, so I just wanted to just quickly share my screen as well, because I know that some people were talking or asking like, what can they do next? So if I may just briefly
Go ahead.
share again. So two of the key things that you can do. We keep on hearing from our MLAs and our MPs that they're not hearing from people on climate. So it is really important that you email, call, and meet your MLA and your MP. Go and walk into their offices, start building a relationship with their staff, and just start hammering them on climate and that you want them to focus on climate. And if you're worried about how they are investing in LNG and fossil fuels instead, let them know that. If you are a member of the BC NDP and you're not happy with them, let them know that. They really need to hear from you, and it is those kind of emails and phone calls and meetings that the staffers will track, and then that gets reported, and that's the only thing that is going to change how this government is making decisions. The other thing that I would like to ask everybody to do, we are about to release the 2025 BC Climate Emergency Progress Report. So this is an annual report that evaluates the BC's government's progress on implementing 10 urgent climate actions. And they're not doing very well right now because they are doubling down on LNG. So there's more than 600 organizations and labor groups and faith groups and businesses that have signed. So if you own a business, if you are a member of a faith group, if you are a member of a labor union, if you're a member of an organization, please go to them and ask them if you can sign that organization or business up as a signatory. Right now, we have more than 600 signatories representing about 2.2 million British Columbians, but we are trying to expand that as well. And I will put the direct link in the chat after this as well. And that's it from me.
Thanks, Tracey. Jeanette and then Suzanne.
Thank you so much for this weekend. It's so encouraging that you had so many attendees at your delegation. And from my understanding, I look forward to getting the recording so that I can see a lot more information, and in particular, which MLAs you presented to. But my understanding is that the number of women MLAs on the caucus that David is so proud of are actually the folk that we have to most encourage, that they have our support, and that we really need them speaking up on this. So I'm really hoping that from inside the NDP, that we can somehow make use, once we get the recording, to encourage folk who do have maybe lines through to their EDAs and MLAs.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's
Thanks. Yeah,
thank you.
Thanks, Jeanette. So, just to repeat, this thing started when Bethany and I had a one-to-one lobby with Sheila Malcolmson, our MLA in the NIMO, and she set us on this path. So, individually meeting with the MLAs is by far the best way to follow up on this. And all you have to do is, it has to be your local MLA, ideally. I mean, she wasn't much. She was Bethany's local MLA, so I slipped in because Sheila's also an old friend of mine, so she made it possible for me to get there. But these things happen. So please set up a meeting with your MLA. The legislature stops sitting on December the 6th. So the period between December the 6th and 15th is kind of available for them to hold community meetings. It's a really good time to ask for a meeting. I've got one set up with my MLA already, so you can do the same. And we will send the recording to everyone so you can go through it again and make any notes. Suzanne, go ahead.
Presentation, I think you have all the information there. One piece of information I think is missing is following the money, doing the actual math on what money this LNG will make and who is getting it and what subsidies will go to it. Somehow doing the math so that you can show leaders and British Columbians exactly where their money is going to go. Because I think when you do the math, it changes the story. Frankly, I think that they are hoping that the money they make off this will pay for the climate damage. And then finally, I'm concerned that all of these rational arguments you present are discounted. I see Carney, who's supposed to be very knowledgeable, lobbying in Asia to sell our clean LNG. And I think what it boils down to is industry capture. And I mean, David Eby, this is not the first time they've heard this story because we have Dogwood here in Victoria and Vancouver that have been talking to them for years with exactly these talking points and no progress. So I think the story, we keep getting more information. The stories it's more solid all the time, but I think we have to take a more cynical tack and assume that rational humanist arguments don't matter. Long-term climate, blah, blah, blah. Exactly. It's industry capture and sorry to be cynical about it, but I think we have to tackle it from that perspective. It's all about the money.
Yeah,
Thanks.
I'm pretty sure industry capture is absolutely what's going on. That Mark Carney's not a specialist in energy and LNG and stuff like that. He's just swallowed the industry talking points. Doug, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks very much to all of you for an excellent presentation. You mentioned about the talking points, and I just wanted to mention another one that I'm aware of that I always mention to people. And this is not a happy point to make, but I think we need to be realistic about the impacts. A few years ago, a researcher called Daniel Bressler, Columbia University, published a paper called The Mortality Cost of Carbon. So we all know that climate change kills people. So Bressler was interested in how much. And he said, the more carbon dioxide we emit, the more people are going to die. And he tried to quantify that. And it's a difficult thing to do, but he came up with an estimate that roughly every 4,000 tons of CO2 emitted will cause one additional climate change related death between now and 2100. So if you take that number, roughly 4,000 tons per death, and you look at the two big projects approved in BC, the LNG Canada and the SIMS projects, and you look at their 30-year targets for how much LNG they're going to emit, you multiply that by roughly 2.5 kilograms of CO2 per kilogram of LNG. I'm talking about downstream emissions now, the final emissions when it's burnt. And then you get that number of the total amount of CO2 that's going to be produced, and you divide that by the 4,000 tons. It's roughly close to 500,000 people we expect will die between now and 2100 as a result of our decisions to go ahead and with these LNG projects. So when I think of that, I feel kind of moral horror that, my taxpayers' dollars are being used, in a government that I used to support. And I remember as a kid knocking on doors for Dave Barrett back in the 70s to be to get the NDP elected, and the distance we've come between there and now, I feel horrified.
Yeah.
So thank you for your presentation, and I will be inspired to go and meet with my MLA
So
and share
let's
this
use
information.
the last 10 minutes just to talk MLAs and political stuff and political influence, because we could, talk until the cows come home about the methane coming out the back end of all this, front end for cows. Um, one of the MLAs we met at the end, I should say, Bowen Marr, who was the previous Minister for Climate Disaster Preparedness, or words to that effect, did talk to us privately afterwards, sharing how distressed she was that the progress on climate has gone 10 steps backwards because now they're fighting climate denialists coming up with all these crap arguments about electric vehicles poison cars and da 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 da, and they're having to fight battles they thought they'd won, like pushing back on the EV mandate, pushing back on the carbon tax. So they're in defensive mode, and they really need to know that people are out there caring about climate. They need to hear from us. Dune, go ahead. There
All
we go.
right.
Go
Sorry
ahead.
about that. Dwight and I met with Ravi Parmer and about climate and had a very interesting conversation with him with a factor that I had never thought about. We basically presented the climate report and left that with him, but he told us that in his polls, he didn't like the polls that we were using, that people weren't concerned about the climate anymore. But he said they were extremely concerned about jobs, and it was the 20 to 30-year-old males that they were especially worried about that were moving over to the Conservative Party, and that they didn't worry about us as environmentalists or tree huggers because we were not going to move to the Conservative Party. But the 20 to 30-year-old men were moving en masse, and that's where they were focused. And he basically said, you won't be happy with what we're doing, but we're sorry, we want to stay in power, and we won't if we go your route. We have to go for jobs.
Yeah.
And it was hard to get past that.
Thanks. Thanks, Dune. If you look in the chat, you'll see that Jeanette wants to contact you. There's her email there. Ron, go ahead.
Hi, and thanks very much for this presentation. I and my little group of Denman Island Climate Action Network people met with Josie Osborne in July and presented to her. And I used a report from the WHO at COP29 that says health is the argument for climate action. And I think she genuinely heard that, but she of course is caught in in being a health minister and faced with all the health emergencies that are happening in terms of physicians and all the needs there. I still come back to this. Well, what do we really need to do to protest to make this public and really garner some action? And I put in the chat suggesting that we try and protest out in front of as many MLAs offices as we can on that week. You mentioned that they're not in Victoria.
You're better off inside the MLA's office talking to them one-to-one, if you can do that.
Well, if we can get in, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So has anyone else met with an MLA who'd like to share how it went right now? And if not, given that, Doug, you had your hand up again? I thought it was an old hand. No. Laura, you're next, Laura. Go ahead.
Yeah, hi. We've met with our area MLAs. So Brittany Anderson, I wasn't able to attend that one, but we've met with her many times. She's definitely concerned. She hears perspectives from the economic and health perspectives and so on. So yeah, I think we keep on meeting with her. We also have met with our new area MLA, Steve Morissette, and he says he's on board. Health professionals have met with him as well as from the climate perspective. And so we've got meetings set up for Brittany in December, and we're gonna meet with Steve again. We haven't requested the meeting yet, but this is nudging me to do that. Yeah, and I think one thing that's important when you meet with your MLA, especially if they're NDP, is asking them what they can do to follow up. I mean, don't just give them information, like kind of get hear what else you need. One thing that Brittany did say too is when writing letters, don't CC people, send it directly because they don't count the CC. So that was interesting. So just a little bit of advice, you know, fill in the 2 column or forward your, if you write to a minister, forward it to your MLA and say to them, here is what I just sent. I wanted you to know.
So can you just clarify, Laura? You said the CCs, they don't count them?
They don't count them in their official counting of letters that they get on certain topics.
I see. If someone receives it by CC. Gotcha.
That's right.
So it's only the actual direct email that matters.
That's right. So if your local constituency MLA gets a CC, they don't count that as things.
Get in the practice of putting your email into a text form, doing a lot of cut and paste to the other people you want to send it to.
Exactly. Yeah.
Then they get it directly. That's really, that's good advice. Thanks. Yeah. Yes, Rosemary, do I take it that's an older hand. So Rosemary, you go ahead.
A group of us, 4, met with Adrian Dix last spring. And we presented something similar to what you did, Guy and Tracey, about the impacts on the economic front and climate front and a bit on the health. Anyway, he listened very politely and told us that, well, that's your story. I don't hear other people with the concerns that you have. So ditto what other people have said.
Yeah, so that last statement is probably the most important thing, that he's not hearing from other people with our concerns. Yeah. Thanks. Glyn, go ahead.
Yeah. One of the things that sort of concerns me is the fact that the backbenchers and the cabinet ministers rely on party funds which are controlled by the people at the top who for whatever reasons, whether it's follow the money reasons or something else, are supporting LNG, etc., and traditional fuels, fossil fuels. So it's unlikely that we are going to achieve that much by talking to our MLAs, even if they theoretically are on our side. And I'm wondering just how we stop the NDP from moving to the right to get back their young men from the Conservatives. And the only way I can think of doing it is somehow supporting the Green Party, which I see as the only other viable option. Yeah. So how do we do that? How do we reduce the dependence of the MLAs who believe in the necessity for renewables and get them to cross the floor to the Green Party? I see that as the only thing, and I don't know how the heck we do that.
Thanks, Glyn. Yeah. So we're going to wind up at 1 o'clock. Tracey, a few words, and I know Bethany has to leave at 1 o'clock for something else. So if we carry on a few words afterwards, she'll just disappear. So Tracey, go ahead.
Yeah, so I just wanted to respond to everybody. And I was curious, all of the amazing meetings that you've had. First, thank you so much for making that effort. I know it is a really big effort. And I know that this year particularly, it's been very hard to get MLA meetings. But I do think it is important to keep on meeting with them and then to follow up. And I'm seeing some other people commenting in the chat. It's not enough to just have one meeting. You have to continually build that relationship with your MLA and have that conversation with them, and then also demonstrate to them that like people do care. The other thing that has frustrated me with some of the MLAs is that they dismiss you as a climate activist. And I'm like, well, what am I? if not a person that is so desperate for change that I've had to become a climate activist. Like, I am an individual. So I think it's really important to share those personal stories of how climate is impacting you, and to keep that pressure on. So the other question I had for everybody, like, with all the MLA meetings that you have had, have you reported those back to the BC Climate Emergency Campaign, to EMICO? Because we are trying to track those, and we do want to hear what the MLAs are saying so that we can also follow up with them directly.
Yes.
Yes. So you all have homework. When I wrote to my Stephanie Higginson a month ago, booking an appointment in early December, knowing that the legislature stopped sitting then, and she said for sure, but she and I have established a good personal relationship, which helps things. And do ask for a meeting. And when you have that delegation, take someone with you. Don't make it just yourself. Take a friend, so it's more about delegation of her. MLAs are meant to meet their constituents. That's what they're there to do, right? And so thanks for everyone for joining us today. We will send everyone in due course the recording. Bethany, any quick final words you want to say in 10 seconds before you vanish?
I reiterate everything people have talked about even if it feels frustrating and like you're not getting anywhere, it is invaluable to keep emailing, keep calling, and keep meeting. And I went to the BC NDP convention as an observer this past weekend, and some of the MLAs you brought up, Brittany Anderson, Josie Osborne, several others, Stephanie Higginson, I was able to talk with face to face, and I completely agree with the sentiment that there is a core group of primarily female MLAs who are really distressed about what's going on with the investment in fossil fuels, and they feel their hands are tied. And we have to keep working to support them and push them to, be uncomfortable and step outside of that comfort zone, and know that they do have other MLAs that are with them as well. And we have to, both ask how we can help and support, and challenge them to stand up to this investment in fossil fuels.
So Blair is asking if there's anyone else in the Oak Bay riding. And I know Patricia Lane is in Oak Bay. I know she's on this call. Anyone else in Oak Bay? If you live in Oak Bay, put your email in the chat so that Blair can get in touch with you, and then you can do a delegation together. And we'll now do that for all 93 MLAs. We'll be finished by midnight. Anyone else want to partner with them to have a joint meeting with an MLA? Use the chance in the chat now to do a little bit of organizing.
Yeah, and it sounds like people here have some really great experiences meeting with your MLA, but if part of it is that you don't know how to, or you feel intimidated, I know someone posted in the chat, there's a training with Seniors for Climate today at 3 p.m. virtually, but also, I don't know about you, Guy and Tracey, but I'm very happy for you to reach out to me. And my Cape BC email is on the slides, which will be in the recording, and we can just kind of talk through how would that look like.
I mean, to give you an example of how this works, Jane Devonshire, who's on the call here, when we mentioned Darlene Rochford, she said to us, "Oh, I know about all this because Jane meets me all the time."
Yeah.
So Jane's doing a great job of keeping her Esquimalt MLA well informed, and she's established that relationship. So that's the valuable thing to do. There's Blair's email for anyone else. Anyone else? What was the request there? Kelly Green. Does anyone else have Kelly Green as their MLA in Steveston? Yeah. Okay, look, let's wrap this up. Go and have lunch. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Tracey. Thanks, Bethany. Thanks to all of you. We'll keep on plugging. Take care, folks. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.